am Cesar Ochoa, and I will be your host this morning. Welcome to Mexico Now's Mexico's Manufacturing Virtual Supply Chain Summit. This is one of the last sessions of this series of webinars. As most of you probably know, this is an event that is usually held in presence. It's a live event, the primary event for supply chain manufacturers in the U.S. Mexico border. This year, because of the pandemic, we're having to do this virtually. So thank you for joining us. This is a space where we are going to analyze how the border has been affected by the pandemic, by the COVID pandemic, and how it has been affected by the USMCA, the NAFTA 2.1 treaty between Mexico and the United States. We have a great group of panelists today with us. All of them are experts, and we tried to keep this balanced. We are having two intellectuals, two researchers, two academics who are going to give us a formal but interesting view on many of the topics that have been created because of the USMCA and the pandemic. They are Mayra Maldonado from the Hunt Institute. She is the associate director of the Institute, and this is a think tank that analyzes issues around the border. The other one is Tom Fullerton, who is the chair of study of trade in the Americas, and he's a professor of economics at UTEP as well. The other person, like me, is in the trenches. He is a savvy businessman who has grown a large series of enterprises that deal with manufacturing in Mexico, mainly along the border, but also in some states within the country. That is Alan Russell, head of TechMac group of companies. And again, I am Cesar Ochoa. I am an attorney. Don't hold that against me. I now welcome Mayra Maldonado to join us. Mayra, buenos días.
Buenos días, Cesar. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Mexico Now, not only for the opportunity to participate in this panel today, but also for the amazing organizational efforts to make this panel possible. I am honored and feel delighted to share this panel today with Dr. Fullerton, Alan Russell, and you, Cesar.
Gracias, Mayra. Just so we tell you what the structure of this session will be, so you know what to expect. After this brief introduction, I'm going to give the floor to Mayra Maldonado, and then in sequence to Tom Fullerton, and then to Alan Russell. They are going to make brief presentations to introduce us to the topics. And then we're going to have a series of questions and answers to keep this light. These are questions and answers on topics that we have already agreed in advance. And as we're doing this, I am going to be checking for questions from the audience so we can address this at the end, the most relevant ones. Obviously, we have limited time, 1 hour, but we will take those that are more interesting so we can discuss them. So without any further ado, I'll leave you with Mayra so she can begin this presentation. Mayra, thank you.
Thank you, Cesar. So if you would have asked me 10 years ago whether I saw myself providing a presentation, a virtual presentation about how a global pandemic could affect the U.S.-Mexico border region, I would have certainly said no. And although many speculate about the impact that it has had in the region, there is still much uncertainty that needs unveiling. And this is the reason why I'm so excited to present to all of you today the information that we have compiled and analyzed for you. We hope you find this information valuable. So I'll start sharing my screen. You see my screen, Cesar?
You're fine, Mayra. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. So today's presentation will focus on the impact that COVID-19 has had on employment and trade in selected U.S. Mexico borderland sister cities. Going from west to east, on the map we have today the sister cities that we will be analyzing, which are Otay Mesa and Tijuana, Santa Teresa and San Jerónimo, El Paso and Ciudad Juárez, Eagle Pass and Piedras Negras, Laredo and Nuevo Laredo, Hidalgo and Reynosa, and Brownsville, Matamoros. Starting with a quick overview of total non-farm employment by selected border metropolitan statistical areas, or MSAs. Here we have depicted historical year-over-year changes on employment on a monthly basis. For all of these MSAs, we see that year-over-year employment plummeted in April 2020, with the largest decrease in San Diego of around minus 14%, meaning that the employment level registered in April 2020 was 14% lower than that recorded in April 2019. All the other MSAs were in a range of between minus 8.5% to minus 11%. Now, let's recall that by mid-March or by the end of March, some governors adopted the stay-at-home policies for their states, unless taking part in essential services and activities. So following April, we can see that in August, El Paso is the MSA that is recovering the fastest, although none of these levels meet the employment level obtained a year ago. Okay, so now let's examine the employment structures of these MSAs. We have outlined the two sectors with the largest employment share for a given MSA. For example, here in San Diego employs the most in the professional and business services at 17.1%, and then government with 16.6%. And what we can see from this table is that all of these border cities have government as their first or second largest workforce sector. Now, this slide shows the changes in employment by sector in these MSAs on a year-over-year basis. So each column shows the two most benefited and the most impacted employment sectors by MSAs. You can have, you can see that with a red text or a green cell. Now, what they have in common here is that from January to August 2020, the leisure and hospitality sector is well below the employment levels from 1 year prior. You can see this across all MSAs. Now, this sector includes the arts and entertainment subsector, as well as the accommodation and food services, meaning that we have here museums, bars, restaurants. So this is something that we were expecting given the lockdown that cities have faced. Now, though not the most impacted, this is also true for other services here, information, trade, and transportation and utilities as well. So now now let's take a look at how employment has reacted in northern border Mexican cities. At the end of 2019, there are contractions registered in employment levels on a year-over-year basis, but not as sharp as those registered in the corresponding U.S. sister cities. Now, the declines go down to minus 5% at most, compared to the minus 10% seen in their U.S. counterparts. And we have thought that one potential explanation for this is that Mexican firms laying off employees do not have the same flexibility that U.S. firms have. Another one could be that Mexican firms could keep their employees by lowering the number of hours worked and keeping them under the public health service in such a way that these employees are still reflected as part of this firm's payroll. So they might have been able to keep them as part of IMSS, Instituto Mexicano del Seguro Social, or Mexican Social Security. Now, this graph also tells us that only Tijuana and Ciudad Juárez have already attained and surpassed the employment levels they held a year ago on average in the months of June and July. respectively. Okay, so on this slide, we see a predominance of the manufacturing sector across all Mexican northern border cities. In fact, for Ciudad Juárez here, Reynosa here, and Matamoros, this sector occupies 2/3 of the entire labor force. Second is trade for Nuevo Laredo with almost 1/4 of its labor force there. And transportation is also, transportation is the second one for Nuevo Laredo, and trade is also an important one across all cities in these Mexican northern border cities. Okay, so from this table, we can see that the sectors that have been hit the hardest have been mining, manufacturing, and construction. And that Reynosa was the most impacted city with a 3.7% level below from the period January through August of last year. So across all cities, the manufacturing sector was hit the most. And as I was saying, Reynosa was hit the hardest. Okay, so my team and I looked at employment level data and at the sub-industry level across these Mexican northern border cities. And we began our analysis with the top 3 employment industry declines in these cities. So in here we have depicted with blue lines, the manufacturing sector, with the green line, the professional and business services here, and the yellow line, trade. So Tijuana, for example, had a drop in the manufacturing of electrical conductors and the manufacturing of automobiles, trucks, and other vehicles. Okay, here. And I would like to highlight that many of these cities had their highest drop in the manufacturing of parts for motor vehicle electrical systems. So here, for example, we see that with Ciudad Juárez and Matamoros, and the manufacturing of parts and accessories for transportation and vehicles. So I'll provide some context here starting with the outbreak in China last year that occurred in Wuhan. So Wuhan is not only the epicenter of the current public health crisis, but it is also an automobile hub for China and the world. Even more than 10% of the vehicles that are sold in China come from this hub. So auto parts are also supplied from this city to the world. And in fact, there are 5 car manufacturers in this city. So the outbreak and the lockdown that followed in Wuhan impacted factories across the world, which closed temporarily, creating car manufacturing supply chain disruptions. And this was one of the very first sectors hit by the current health crisis. And we have that information here. Okay, so in here we have the top 3 employment increases from these border cities. And I won't go in detail on this slide, but I would like to highlight that in 4 of these Mexican northern border cities, the employment of manufacturing of scientific and professional devices increased. So among others, this category includes the production, assembly, or maintenance of scientific instruments, medical or surgical instruments, and laboratory instruments. The second category, the manufacturing of radio, television, and communications equipment. This also includes the production, assembly, or maintenance of radio and television devices, but also of phones, microphones, speakers. So all what is related to communication, and there might be a higher demand for such devices in order to be able to communicate efficiently while studying or working remotely. Another category that we see that has seen its employment increase, not as much as these ones that we have just mentioned, but is the supermarkets category, which belongs to trade. And this is most likely a result of increased demand for food, household, and other essential items, which require stores to keep goods in stock. Okay. Now let's turn our attention into trade now. And in here we see that Mexico and Canada are now the top trading partners with the US at $630 billion. China was third in 2019. And this might be explained also by the US-China trade war that started back in March of 2018. Okay. So what we have compiled on this table are the top 10 US-Mexico border ports of entry for total trade. And we found that in 2019, 5 ports of entry accounted for 80% of the world merchandise trade value. So we have Laredo with 43.6%, El Paso with 14.9%, Otay Mesa with 9.2%, Hidalgo with 6.9%, and Santa Teresa with 5.7%. This is for 2019. This is for the first 7 months, and this is a comparison of the first 7 months of 2019 and 2020. And after the outbreak of COVID-19, U.S. Mexico ports of entry experienced a steep drop in total merchandise trade value to the world. And El Paso was the most severely impacted with a drop of 52.1% compared to the same period. We also can see here that Santa Teresa was also impacted, and Del Rio, I mean, all of them have been severely impacted, but El Paso, Del Rio, and Santa Teresa have been the most impacted. Okay. So I will not go into much detail on this slide, but I will provide a general overview of what we have compiled. We tried to find the trade that had been the most affected during the COVID pandemic, and the U.S. Mexico ports of entry that benefited the most as well. So the top 3 export and import commodity decreases by port of entry are shown first here, decreases, and then we will show the top 3 export and import commodity increases. So let's start with the top 3 export commodity increases here. I can tell, okay. And we can see from this slide that in general, the 87 sector, when I say the 87, it means that the first 2 digits belong to that sector, and we have here the 87 sector. So the 87 sector, which is a vehicle parts and components, and which we highlighted in yellow, blue, light blue, has been the most affected by exports on the border. So vehicle parts include parts for trailers, tractors, motor cars, motorcycles, and vehicles. Same applies here. We have that the 87 sector has been the most impacted in terms of import commodity decreases across all ports of entry. And in terms of those that have been the most benefited, we can't highlight one single sector. So it's pretty diversified, but we have this information for you in case you would like to take a look into it. Okay, so we have this graph for you that standardizes the new coronavirus cases on a daily basis per 1 million inhabitants in a 5-day moving average. And we can see that the sanitary measures aimed to reduce the transmission of the pandemic seem to have diminished these new daily cases. However, we can see here that recently there is a continuous upward trend for these new cases in El Paso. So I'd like to say that please stay safe, and I'll be here for any questions that you may have. I'll pass it over to you, Cesar. Let me try to understand this controls here.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mayra. Thank you very much. That was enlightening. Next, we will have Dr. Tom. Thank you, Mayra. Gracias. And now we will have a chance to address a lot of the information that Mayra has just discussed in the next chapter of this session. So I won't have any questions for her at this time. Gracias, Mayra. Now, if you please help me welcome Dr. Tom Fullerton to this webinar. Tom, good morning.
Good morning, Cesar. I want to say thanks to you for hosting this event, and also thanks to Mexico Now, in particular, Elizabeth Mendoza and Juan Gonzalez, for all of their behind-the-scenes efforts to make this go very smoothly. Let's see, this is a tough time to carry on, events like this, and their efforts to inform all of your subscribers, with respect to the various panels that have been taking place this week are extremely helpful, and things have gone very well. It's been interesting to watch. The slides from the Hunt Institute showed, there are a lot of changes that have occurred in 2020 in terms of business and manufacturing. And a lot of those things have been surprising. Some of them have worked out in manners that could be anticipated, but most, really have not. And so, anytime you want to compete in a global industry, it's important to be ready to respond to unanticipated events. But I think 2020 has challenged, even the most mobile of all businesses and managers and executives. And we'll get more of that discussion, with our next panelist, of course, which is Alan Russell of TECMA. In terms of some of the things that have been interesting, one thing that stands out in recent weeks is the fact that even though there were so many manufacturing disruptions on both sides of the border, international trade has recovered to a large extent. And now, the volume of cargo trucks coming across the international bridges into El Paso exceed the levels of last year. At least in July, they exceeded them. So that was a very rapid recovery after what was observed in April and May. By June, they had almost recovered, and then in July, they exceeded year-ago levels. And that one, is one that, caught a lot of people by surprise. And it just showed, a couple of things. One was that there was a lot of pent-up demand that built up in the system in April and May. In other words, yes, there was a lot of declines in terms of, customers purchasing less goods and services, but the demand for those goods and services didn't go away. The demand for those goods and services simply was set aside, and once the economy in both Mexico and the United States started reopening, customers started purchasing things to replace their depleted inventories. And that translated very quickly into a lot of demand, in the border regions of, all of the states along the border, from Texas all the way to California, from Tamaulipas all the way to Baja California Norte. And things have recovered quickly, and a lot of the early and doom and gloom scenarios, or a lot of the cautionary notes that were being made back in March and April, they materialized for a short while, and then they began subsiding relatively rapidly. That doesn't mean all the risks have gone away, but a lot of the problems were adjusted to more rapidly than a lot of people anticipated. And so for now, it appears that North America is enjoying what economists refer to informally as a V-shaped recovery. In other words, North America fell into the recession very rapidly, but now it is emerging from the recession very rapidly as well. I said that doesn't mean that the risks have gone away. In fact, as Maida emphasized towards the end of her presentation, the infection rate for the coronavirus has accelerated here in the El Paso Juarez borderplex in recent weeks. And let's see, a lot of people are cautioning that it appears that we're in a V-shaped recovery, but we may end up with the dreaded double dip, let's see, recession, in which we may fall back into a recession during the fourth quarter of this year. Nobody wants that to happen, but that risk cannot be ruled out. I want to emphasize a couple more things. Let's see, and then I will, let's see, be glad to respond to any questions, or we can move on to the next presentation. In terms of the labor market, let's see, or the labor markets on the north side of the border, all of the border metropolitan areas have seen labor force utilization increase very rapidly in recent months. The biggest increases occurred in June, but let's see, July and August also, let's see, saw improvements in unemployment rates. And some of that was due to discouraged workers dropping out of the labor force, so it wasn't unambiguously a positive situation. But a lot of it was because of increases in employment. And there was some concern in the United States that, let's see, people were going to hold off on going back into the labor force as long as there was, let's see, the stimulus package providing a social safety net to those workers. In other words, they would choose to receive the government payments rather than return to work. But the evidence indicates that most workers have not followed that pattern. They recognize that, let's see, social safety nets of a temporary nature are just that, temporary. Most people want to, let's see, return to their jobs, and they recognize the value of having a job. And so this has been reflected, throughout the border regions from Brownsville all the way through San Diego. And let's see, a lot of the concerns over potential abuses in the system have not materialized. And I don't think that they're likely to materialize. Let's see, even if we go back into a higher infection rate on a more broad geographic basis than what is currently the case. There's simply too much at risk in terms of managing, let's see, household economies to not take advantage of employment opportunities. And that's certainly what the data have indicated, at least up through August. Let's see, the next thing I would like to emphasize in terms of, let's see, the border is that the cargo activity has come back in concert with manufacturing output. And that shouldn't come as any surprise to any of the subscribers of Mexico Now, because I would, let's see, hazard a guess that most of the business-to-business transactions that have occurred in 2020, at least during the third quarter, a lot of them have materialized here in August because of all the manufacturing recoveries and subsequently all of the inventory buildups that have occurred, and then eventually those inventory stocks have to be transported across the border. In fact, the manufacturing can't take place without the cross-border interactions. And let's see, not surprisingly, let's see, freight moving across the border has accelerated tremendously in recent weeks. And that pattern is likely to continue throughout the fourth quarter. One thing that receives a lot of focus throughout the border regions is the wait times at the international bridges. Those wait times, however, are confined for the most part to personal vehicles. In other words, it's not affecting the cargo vehicles. Yes, the wait times for cargo vehicles are somewhat longer, but let's see, most of the increases in the wait time has been confined to personal vehicles. And let's see, even with the concerns over how the virus is transmitted across international borders and the role that international trade can play in that, the authorities have done a good job in terms of not impeding supply chains as badly as was the case earlier in the year. The lessons seem to have been learned. And let's see, that part of the supply chain, I'm cautiously optimistic that part of the supply chain is going to remain intact. And that should allow for even more manufacturing growth as we move into the fourth quarter. With that, I think, I can turn it back over to Mr. Ochoa, and I'll be glad to respond to any questions that the audience may have, either now or later in the program today.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much. Thank you for that. What you're letting us know supports the idea that this border is quite resilient. Thank you. Thank you so much. We will have, again, an opportunity to ask Dr. Fullerton questions later in this panel. Now I thank Dr. Fullerton, and I welcome Alan Russell. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Cesar. Good to be here.
You have the floor.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you and Mexico Now for hosting this. It's an honor to be here. Tecma has a business model of hosting U.S. and international companies in Mexico. And primarily the locations are on the border. We do have operations, as Cesar mentioned earlier, in the center part of the country. With the onset of the pandemic, as Dr. Fullerton said, everyone as a business is anticipating how to handle unexpected events. But I will tell you that nobody could make this up. Nobody could have anticipated the challenges that we have had over the last 7 months. The Tecma team and every team in the maquilas is the term we use for these international plants in Mexico, has been challenging. Long hours. Important to keep the people calm and understanding, protecting our vulnerables, and focusing on our #1 priority, and that's safety. Safety of our workforce is paramount, and so we've learned a lot. We've learned, as the United States has, how to deal with the pandemic better, how to treat it, how to identify it, and we have put that in our quiver of experience to help us move forward. The recovery was completely unanticipated that it would be so great. Of course, we wanted it that way, and we hoped for it that way, but unconditionally, as a general statement, I want to say that every one of our clients are expanding. They are receiving additional orders from their base, supplying that pipeline that had emptied during the pandemic, and it has really put the pressure on the factories. We had challenges between our two governments, meaning the U.S. and Mexico, during the pandemic, because essential factories were allowed to continue to run. Non-essential were required to stop production and send the people home, with pay, of course, to make sure that the people were comfortable and that we were protecting their jobs for the future. That did have its challenges, because let's say that we have a medical facility producing heart monitors. That's essential. However, we can't ship the heart monitors without the box to put them in. The box supplier down the street was not essential. So we had those types of challenges to deal with and negotiate with the government. Then we had the challenge of the US saying that some operations were essential, such as the auto industry. Mexico did not identify the auto industry as essential. So not only the challenges of keeping the factories organized, clean, implementing protocols, we were dealing with these differences between our governments that created additional challenges, which I would say that at the end of the day have been worked out and everybody's on the same page. So with that, I'd like for us to get into questions and answers and engage on what you as the listener is most interested in. Again, it's a pleasure. Thank you. Cesar.
Thank you very much, Alan. in 1968, one of my favorite books was written. By, it's a little book that I highly recommend. It was written by Will and Ariel Durant. They are two historians who wrote an encyclopedia about history, many volumes. And they wrote this little book at the end. It's called The Lessons of History. And they tried to summarize what they learned after writing so much about history. What lessons did they learn? It is too early to write the history of the pandemic. In fact, we're just beginning with it. But lessons have been learned so far. So the first question for the panelists is, what lessons have we learned from the pandemic so far that you would like to share with the audience? I'll welcome everyone. Would you, all of you, turn on your cameras and come back to the screen? Tom, Alan. So that's a question. Who would like to take that one first? And I'd like you to take, each one of you take on that question.
I'd like to go first, Cesar.
Gracias, Mayra.
De nada. I think that there are several lessons here, and of course it's a challenge dealing with the pandemic, but it is also an opportunity, in particular here on the border. And one of the items that I'd like to highlight is that in order to keep our border competitive, we need to improve the infrastructure. And we know that many firms will start thinking or thinking about planning in a different way their operations. So there might be movements or expansion of some firms that have already been established here, because they have, given the disruption in these supply chains, they'll start thinking about moving from other countries or overseas to other more near shoring, let's say, from offshoring to nearshoring. So there's an opportunity for the border to keep not only the infrastructure competitive, but to increase also connectivity, communications, and also rely on the talent that we have here on the border. While we were looking at the shares for employment, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for transportation and logistics here in the region as well. And I think that the border can provide also professional services to advocate for those firms, given the multicultural environment and bilingualism that exists here. I think that's it from my side.
Gracias, Mayra. Dr. Fulton, Tom?
One lesson that has been learned is that, dealing with a complicated virus requires not letting, the societal guard down, so to speak. And in this regard, I think it's important to point out that in 1918, the last time we had a pandemic of this nature affecting the global economy, during the fall of 1918, there was a spike in the infection rate. And all of the healthcare professionals that I have spoken with and have listened to or read about have been cautioning in recent weeks that yes, things have gone well. They went well in September, but we need to be very wary about what happens in November and in December. Okay, so we're not even to November yet, and so it would be premature to assume that everything is going to operate well, and we are going to, not have to confront any more major disruptions in terms of the labor force and its health. Right now, I think the lesson that might be getting overlooked is that we're at risk for, a rebound occurring in November and December when a lot of viruses start spreading anywhere. So that's something that we shouldn't let our guard down about.
Absolutely. Thank you. Alan.
Thank you, Cesar. It's interesting that what we've learned and how fast we had to learn it. The first thing, as I mentioned earlier, was the safety of our people. That's our moral responsibility as a business. Number one, unconditionally. Number two is a business responsibility. Saving these jobs for the future was paramount. If we let these factories shut down and fail, and our clients fail, those jobs don't come back. So keeping those factories in a position, keeping our clients as healthy as possible to rebound and bring that employment back into the plants was just so important. Then we had to do it safely. That brings us to protocol. We all are aware of the protocol issued by the CDC and the Mexico equivalent and the requirements for safety. Implementing those protocols in plants that have 500 to 1,000 people, and in some cases, our friends with 6,000 people in one plant, has been very interesting. We take the temperatures of employees before they get on the bus to come to work. If they don't pass that first check, they don't come. They're checked again when they get to the facility, and then making sure that they maintain distancing as they're coming into the facility. It does no good to separate them once you're in the facility if everybody gangs up, coming in. So things you just hadn't thought about before. Then the restrooms, the cafeteria, the workspaces, and the separation of the workspaces. But what we've learned with this is that protocol works. We haven't had an outbreak in a facility due to this protocol. It has helped us prove that if we send these people home with pay, and let's be realistic, that most of our workforce do not have homes like we do to go home to. So we sent them home initially with pay, and for the most part, that was a vacation, and it was treated like a vacation. They had a great time, but it did cause the community to have a higher incident of infection. Bringing them back to the plant, implementing the protocol, educating every day, pounding it, reinforcing how not to take the virus back home to your family and to your grandparents, how to be responsible as a young adult, and sending them home every day with that was a much better formula. And as a result, the factories, the maquilas, are running less than half of an infection rate than the general community in our border cities. So lessons learned, it's possible to deal with this new normal and to increase production, increase productivity, and satisfy the demand at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. One of the concerns is that we haven't seen even the end of the beginning of this pandemic. I like triathlons, and I like to compare this to an Ironman competition. Now, this was certainly not a 5K or 10K run. It was more like an Ironman competition where we were thrown in the cold water all of a sudden, and we don't even know where to swim, the direction where we need to swim to. We're disoriented and cold and afraid, and then we have to swim for a long time. And I think we're just barely getting out of the water. Then you need to pace yourself in the bicycle. It's going to be a long haul, and then eventually you have to start running a marathon. And I think this is a bit like that. Any predictions as to how we're doing in those terms? We're talking about lessons of history now. I'm asking you to venture a bit into the future. Are we a more resilient region? How, in your view, are going to be faring in the near future? Mayra?
Yes, Cesar, and I'm also I'm gonna combine this question with the question that I see from David Ramirez, because I like to talk not only about COVID impact but also about USMCA impact. And one of the things that I like to cover right now is that he's asking whether we are seeing supply chain restructure right now from the reshoring, from offshoring to nearshoring, right? What we have seen, and this is information that we either get anecdotal through anecdotal evidence or through some data, is that we see more distribution centers coming here on the border. For example, Amazon is one. And we will continue to see that given the pandemic. So businesses will start thinking about the disruptions that these supply chains have created. We know, for example, that ports were congested in China, or that they couldn't leave those vessels. We know from other companies as well that they prefer to start sending their shipments through air instead of through vessel. So that also impacted not only their costs, but also those that were hit the most were those factories that have just-in-time production, right? So there was a decrease in the production fell also because inventory shortages. So that's one thing that is happening, or that will continue happening. But the other thing is that if we think about the routes of origin for the automotive industry from the USMCA, there's a transition from 65% that was adopted in NAFTA to 75%. And this transition could lapse between 3 years to 7 years. 3 years for light vehicles and 7 years for heavy trucks and trailers and tractors and all of that. So this will tighten the supply chain for for vehicles manufacturers, right? So that will also add up into the tightening of supply chains. So that's something that we are expecting, and that's and on the border we are located on a very strategic position geographically, and also in terms of covering Spanish and English. So I think that businesses have a real opportunity here to take advantage of.
Thank you. That was a beautiful segue into the other topic, which is USMCA and the effect of nearshoring or reshoring. Tom, Alan, would you like to add something to what Mayra has said on this topic?
Let me just say that first, we're talking about the manufacturing sector, okay? I feel terrible for our friends that are in the restaurant business or retail businesses that in the border zones are suffering horribly because of the challenges we haven't talked about of the border crossings and the shutdown of the border. So from a manufacturing perspective, we have entered the perfect storm. We are going to have our challenges with the protocol going forward, no question about it, and we're going to deal with it. It's a new normal that we've got to live with. However, as a hopeless optimist that I'm accused of sometimes, I want to say that the first thing we had was the USMCA NAFTA argument among our countries. And a lot of companies sat on the fence before making decisions to adjust their manufacturing priorities in North America. They said, wait, let's wait and see what happens. Well, okay, USMCA was passed. Then they say, okay, well, let's wait because this trade war is costing us a lot of money, but the administration may change. So let's wait on the election and see how that works out. So they're sitting on the fence. Then we come up with this issue of the pandemic. That was the tipping point. That's where companies that were sitting on the fence went, okay, regardless of the administration, the future is going to result in tariffs between China and the US, most likely. But this pandemic and slowing down the supply chain and crippling these companies has been unprecedented. So just like Mauda said, the large companies are not going to tolerate their suppliers to be scattered around the world anymore. They want them to be local. They want to be able to reach out and touch them. No longer are they going to accept, well, it's on the water. Well, there's a longshoreman strike in Long Beach, and is slowing us down. No longer, well, the pandemic, they're not going to put up with that anymore. So they're forcing those suppliers to get local. So local meaning North America. If they're going to supply North America, they got to be in North America. So where are you going to go? You do your analysis, you take a look as a board, you make a business decision. Are you going to move the plant to the central US somewhere and then worry about moving it again into a lower cost environment when the taxes and minimum wages force you into a competitive position that's untenable? So we are setting, as Mata said, geographically in the perfect spot. The border zone is going to get to look at every one of these companies that are coming back. And as we stay prepared, stay nimble, stay ready, we are going to receive that business in the manufacturing sector, which is going to help anything that touches the manufacturing sector. 630 billion, as Mata said, for last year. This recovery is going to show us that it's probably going to bump that again this year, even in one of the greatest recessions that we've seen. That's my thought.
Thank you. Thank you. Tom?
Well, I think the last thing we need is an academic simply trying to repeat what Captain of Industry already said very eloquently and very efficiently.
Thank you. We have a question from the audience. We're running out of time really, really fast. This is perhaps more a question for Alan, but I'll take your thoughts on this. David Ramirez said that his feed while Mayra was answering the question was lost. But he's asking, there's a lot of hype about this nearshoring, reshoring issue, and he was asking if there's any actual movement already, if there's any evidence of that happening already.
Absolutely. We are receiving visits and calls from North America and from Taiwan and China on a weekly basis. It's unprecedented. In my 35 years, and my hair is more gray than most of you listening, and certainly those on this panel. It's never been so active and so intense on analyzing new business as it is right now, even with the pandemic. Not so many people are traveling, but this virtual mode of doing business is accelerating and people getting comfortable with it. I think we're at a tipping point of great things to happen.
Thank you. We're running out of time, but I'd like your thoughts quickly on, before we go into wrap-up comments from each one of you. Any comments on the issue of infrastructure or infrastructural aspects during our practice sessions, because even though you may not think this is not as spontaneous as you think, we actually practiced it. We talked about issues such as the rates of exchange. So how are all of these things going to affect the peso, the dollar, general infrastructure questions, border crossings, just very quickly, because we have 6 minutes to wrap this up.
Let's see, since you've pulled back the curtain and notified everybody that we had a pre-meeting yesterday to discuss these things, when we talked about the currency market, it was in the context of, what happens if there is a resurgence of the pandemic, and there are severe policy differences and political issues in the United States. Is that going to damage, the peso further than what it already has been damaged? And whenever things like this, whenever disruptions occur in the United States, it tends to have fairly noticeable effects on both the Mexican peso and the Canadian dollar. But I think in the context of the peso, it's important to recognize that on an inflation-adjusted basis, the peso is already 30% undervalued relative to the dollar. And so if things, let's see, do worsen in the United States. And there's no guarantee that they are going to worsen. In fact, a lot of people, let's see, believe that the U.S. economy has already weathered the storm and is going to be recovering. Let's see how fast or how slowly remains to be seen, but the path to recovery has already been launched. But if there is, let's see, a disruption that causes, let's see, the economy to contract again in the United States, it's not necessarily going to turn into, let's see, additional weakness for the peso, because the peso already has undershot its equilibrium value. I said the peso is undershot. Its currency markets have, for the last 4.5 years, had the peso below what it should be by, just on the basis of Mexico's economic fundamentals. So I think, let's see, the fears over the peso deteriorating rapidly are not going to materialize.
Thank you. Mayra.
I agree on this one with Dr. Fullerton.
Alan, any thoughts on that?
I'll leave the theories of what's going to happen economically to the experts.
Indeed, indeed. We have 3 minutes to wrap this up. I'm sorry to see that it went by so fast. Any final thoughts from each one of you?
Let me just get on my optimistic sandbox one more time. In my tenure sitting in this seat with TECMA, I have seen multiple presidential elections on both sides of the border. I have seen recessions. This has been the fourth one that is of significance. We had the violence period. We've had now this pandemic and the new normal. And every year, with a few minor little blips, commerce has increased between our two countries, the U.S. and Mexico. This $630 billion of trade going back and forth across our border creates opportunities. If I was a young person, I would not go anywhere and focus my attention and my career path on right here in these border cities and live a dream for a career path. So I really encourage people to stay the course and enjoy what's going to happen the next 3 to 5 years right here in front of us.
Thank you, Alan. And you've been a visionary all of your life, so I'm trusting that you are reading this one correctly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayra?
Cesar, I can't stop reiterating that the border plays a strategic position, not only in terms of geography, but also in terms of the cultures and the languages that we have here. So businesses will think about reshoring. This is an opportunity for the border. Businesses have to think about that opportunity and how to take advantage of that. Government businesses need to think about how to be creative, innovative, given these new challenges and other potential new challenges as well. And we have the talent here. So I think that that's the most important part. We have ways to do it. We have to be prepared. Just let's start preparing ourselves for that scenario. Thank you very much, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mayra. Tom, final thoughts?
I'd just say that historically, it's always been shown that international commerce, interregional commerce as well, that always leads to new business opportunities and higher income performance. So as long as, let's see, we recognize that if we want to improve standards of living anywhere in the world, what's been transpiring here on the border is something that needs to be reinforced, not only within this region, but everywhere in the world. And if it is, then incomes will continue to improve.
Thank you. My final thoughts are along those lines as well. I'm optimistic. They say that we attorneys have a problem for every solution, but I've actually been proven wrong time and time again by people like you who live on the border. We are resilient. I think that's probably one of the best ways to describe how we are. Just like Adam, I've seen my share of crises along, here in the border with migration, with violence, and I think all of those trials have hardened us and prepared us from what we're living these days. I saw the community come together very strongly. I saw Paso and Juarez working together. Groups that, from business and private sector working shoulder to shoulder to solve these problems. And I'm optimistic. If I had one final thought for our audience would be to get involved. I saw how companies rose up to the occasion and really lost sleep and invest a lot of money in keeping their employees safe. I think we should not let our guards down. We should keep on protecting our employees. We also should look outside beyond the walls of the companies and see what other needs are present in the community. Probably hospitals need money. Bureaucracies by definition are slow to react. Just get involved. I have a client right now who's working on donating hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment to the hospitals in Juarez. And many of them have done so already. So I invite all of our audience to get involved, participate, and help shape this optimistic future that our panelists share. With that, thank you so much. Have a good rest of the week. And thank you to our host, Mexico Now, Sergio Ornelas Jr. and Sr. for such a wonderful job. They are a source of, there's no other networking enterprise like what they have. So thank you for keeping the work, for adapting to this new reality. And everyone have a good day. It's been an honor to join you at this space. Have a good day.